Let's go to Willem Klumpenhouwer, please.
Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Willem Klumpenhauer. I'm here as one of the co-founders of More Neighbours Calgary, which is a grassroots volunteer-run organization dedicated to bringing an evidence-driven voice to the conversation around housing, affordability, and supply. My day job involves a lot of data analysis and map making, so today I'd like to bring you a sort of data-driven perspective that emphasizes what this whole rezoning for housing thing really is, which is it's really just fine. Next slide, please. You see, I've been hearing, I can't believe I'm making another Peanuts reference, but I've been hearing a lot of various forms of panic about this change to the base zone, fueled often by misinformation or misinterpretations of data. And a lot of people out there, and you've heard and we'll hear from many of them, remind me a bit of Sally in this Peanuts cartoon yelling panic in the streets, and I'm, I guess, Charlie Brown in this one, scratching my head. So I did what I often do when confusion abounds, and I looked for a way to visualize and understand what this might actually look like in communities. Next slide. Before we get to the data, it's important to remind you we're talking about at most a set of cute row houses being built on a typical lot. I live near Altadore. I've seen lots of these. They're very nice. They're not towers or even substantially bigger building envelopes than the duplexes that get built or even some of the single family homes. So when you see the maps I'm going to show you, keep this in mind. Next slide. So here's what I did. I took every single dwelling or duplex parcel from the city's open data on land use and parcel locations, and I gave it a score. Score is based on a few things that I think are probably going to make it more likely to be converted into a row house: proximity to downtown, quality of transit access, community age. So this map you're seeing here shows likelihood of conversion score, so to speak, and as you might expect, it lines up pretty well with where existing applications are starting to come through, even in our current constrained situation. So lighter colors, sorry, the maps might not be easy to see on these screens. Lighter colors means higher likelihood. Next slide. I then estimated roughly how many lots the cities might expect to be converted to row houses based on numbers I've been hearing. You have a bit of a slow ramp up over the first couple of years, and then a pretty consistent 500 parcels a year. You can visually multiply that if you'd like to. If you don't believe those numbers, that's fine. This shows an estimate of the cumulative number of conversions we're talking about 2 row houses for the next 10 years. So with the number of lots and the score of how likely a lot might be to change, we can sort of simulate 10 years of change and see what it looks like. I picked from the pool of low-density lots in the city at random, but I weighted that picking based on the score I just showed you of likelihood of conversion. Next slide. Here's 2 examples of what communities might look like. So there's a central neighborhood, Mount Pleasant. This might be very hard to see for you, but there's a lot of orange dots that show parcels that haven't changed or have stayed R1 or have stayed single family. And then there's a few purple dots showing changes that have been converted to row houses. So they are there. You can see them. They're a little bit darker. I think these slides are probably in their submission anyway, so you can look there. And then a curvy neighborhood like Shaughnessy is another example. It means, especially with curvy roads, you can see that there's just not a lot of parcels that are going to be converted. And if you live in one of these houses, those roads mean you're likely not even going to see one from your front window. So what does this mean for each of your wards? Next slide, please. So here's a chart showing the total percent of all lots that get changed in this simulation that I did, and some of the existing ones in blue. I invite you to find your ward on this chart. But actually, this chart's a little bit misleading because the x-axis only goes up to 3.5%. Next slide, please. So this is the actual sort of impact in terms of 100% of what your ward might look like in terms of the amount of change that we're talking about here realistically. Next slide. So for those who are fiscal hawks on council, or really anybody, I'm very excited for you about this because there's sort of a fundamental law of the math of cities that says you can't have good services and low taxes without some density. So simply put, a few more neighbors in your neighborhood means there's more people to split the bill, and it makes things like transit and other services, as you know, more cost effective, and that's really great. And if you're concerned about property taxes, which is totally fine, this is one way to keep them low without sacrificing services and with, as you saw, minimal impacts to communities. I'd be more than happy to accompany you to any of your CA meetings to explain this if you'd like, or make you maps for your community. Happy to do that. Next slide. In summary, the zoning change is fine. It's not a silver bullet. It's not the solution to the housing problem. It is one of the things we need to do. It's a pretty boring change. Honestly, it can help move us in the right direction on housing affordability and supply. And crucially, when you share this impact across the city, it's minimal for each community and each ward. You can save money to boot. Thank you. Hi.
Thank you for the slides and the data extractions. The question I have is when you extrapolate that did you put another layer in, which is the cost layer, to see exactly where affordability is? Because again, when you take a look at geographically, a lot of it's also land value that gets in there. Have you
Yeah,
done
absolutely. I had to work with the open data that I have and the quality of data I have, and like market type data is very hard to get, and it's not published really on the open data. So there is no affordability layer. This was just sort of an idea of, if you really let it be a free-for-all, as some people have mentioned, what would that actually look like? And so you're right, there's extra layers there. There's layers there that aren't accounted for. So I picked some ones that I thought were the most appropriate. And obviously, I think there's some correlations between these things.
Hopefully we can get you that data, because that'd be an interesting scenario.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey, hi. Thanks for all the number crunching. I've got a bunch of friends that love doing that, putting things together. I think looking at all the charts, a lot of that is opinions and numbers that you put together. And the one that I wanted to kind of zero in on, it was you kind of ended with adding a whole bunch more growth and density would drive down our property taxes. So my question is, because we've seen a whole bunch of growth, a whole bunch of density in Toronto, huge 10% tax increase there. Edmonton, big tax increase. We're having a lot of growth here in density in Calgary over the last several years. We just raised taxes almost 8% last year. I just haven't seen it. So what makes you believe that if we continue with more density, that taxes are going to go down?
Well, for clarity, I'm not saying the taxes are going to go down. I'm saying that taxes are probably going to go up less steeply if that's what you as a council value. It's trying to keep things low. The math is that if you have more people in the same area, you can do these services for cheaper, right? People talk about Vancouver. Well, Vancouver's still getting more expensive. That's true. But it might be way more expensive than it is now if they hadn't done some of the interventions that they have as well. And Toronto might be the same way. Now, I'm not a housing market economist. I'm not going to delve into that. There are others of those out there who've talked about that. But that's my feeling about how this works, is like the math doesn't change. And if you build within the city, it's cost effective. If you add new things to the edge of the city, it's not so cost effective. And again, the math does show that.
Yeah, I think I'm not disagreeing with some of the math. I think just what people are saying is that we're seeing all sorts of levels of government saying these policies are going to fix things and we're going to help your affordability, and none of them are. I don't care if it's federal, provincial, even on the municipal level. Almost everything that seems to be proposed or that has been implemented has not been making anything helping the affordability crisis. So people are maybe a little bit not convinced, I guess, when we come in and tell them we're going to do this and we're going to solve your problems. So anyways, I appreciate the work you put in, and we got to put it all together. But again, thanks again for your time.
And Councillor McCain, I'll say, yeah, it can be frustrating to see the number continue to go up, right? Number continues to go up, but you have to look at the slope of that number. The Auckland example, for example, is the numbers may still go up. It's going up a lot less steeply than it was before. So that's part of something you have to keep in mind. And if you can do bigger policies to have bigger impacts, like RCG, you could argue is not enough to do that. But it's a start. And if it keeps things from going less steep, I'm a fan of less steep.
Willem, Mr. Klumpenhouwer, you can stay at the dais there. Wanted to dig in a little bit deeper. You have this picture that you paint with the stats that what's going to happen in Calgary is quite small, percentage-wise. Obviously, the felt impacts of that, depending on where it lands, are going to be, extreme for somebody on a street somewhere. Potentially change that the city is facing. Can you paint a picture around what this means for transit and some of the services that you were just in conversation with Councillor McLean about?
Yeah, I spoke in September during the housing strategy about how it's also a transit strategy to add more homes inside the city. This is a perfect example of that as well. Like, what makes transit tick is having many people trying to reach many places rather than concentrating all of your movement at one time and to one place. That's kind of an inefficient way to have transit work. And so if you have more people in a smaller area, you put a stop down, there's more people near that stop all of a sudden, and more people can take transit, right? So it does create a more cost-effective transit system to have people nearby. And of course, we're talking a very gentle change here, right? We're not talking, this isn't going to save the transit system at all necessarily, but it's, again, one of those things that really helps, and density and having people nearby transit is obviously the very first step in getting people to use transit and making transit useful for people.
Okay, so then arguably, a more measured approach or a more planned approach to add density in nodes, corridors, all these other things would help that transit strategy, would help. Can you speak to me, because obviously there's been a lot of thoughts in the broader community about phasing this some way, adding a little bit more clarity, certainty because this is change management we're ultimately talking about. Why do you gravitate towards this blanket, gentle versus a more, stage stepped, let's put it here, let's paint the map and have our transit line up?
Yeah, I think maybe the word I take exception with is the versus. You don't have to do either or. More neighbors, like we often talk about how this change it's really about updating what sort of the base idea of a neighborhood and a house looks like and is. We're not talking about building towers, right? That's not what's before us. But I think you also need to be aggressive about putting housing near transit-oriented development. There were some good discussions in September, and I hope they come up again about concentrating development around LRT stations and using that to sort of bolster the transit network, a bit of a positive cycle. So I think you can do both, and I think the overall citywide change that we're talking about is important. We heard yesterday a little bit about not trying to minimize the focus on one parcel and have this bidding war and having this sort of focus in time and opening things up to what the market really wants and what the market might be able to do. So that's one of them. And the other is a lot of these other processes take a very long time. My partner's involved with the latest land use update. And it's going to take a long time for those things to come through, and this is a gentle change to get us started, and those things can then be layered on top later. So I think it behooves us to sort of do all of these things at once.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, as you look at through your policy lens, you see like it really from your perspective is it has to be a both and.
Yeah, I would love to have this pass and have you all vote for it. That would be fantastic, and then come back and let's talk about density around transit and focus on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. No further questions, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's go to Councillor Wyness, please.
Thanks. Stay there, please. When you look at the challenge, and I'm listening to the stories, we have a supply and demand imbalance, a massive one. Do you think this would result in inadequate density? Because we need transit-oriented development. We need that as intense development. When we do a blanket zone, are we adequately providing the opportunity for people?
Well, look, when you build a building, I'm not a builder, but I assume when you build a building, you generally build it one floor at a time, and you focus on getting a good foundation. So this is not enough, in my opinion, and I think that's the conversation we have at More Neighbors. Like, this is not enough, but this is a good start. This is a way to spread out the change, and then you can also concentrate the change. And if you do both, that can be a very powerful combination. So I don't think this is enough to solve the affordability problem. I think it will add supply, and I hope that adding that supply and the right kind of supply, as we heard, will drive down rents specifically, so that can help with things. But we need both, and I'm hoping to see more.
Yeah, and then in your data, how are we making our assumptions on ownership rights? It's easy to say everyone will do this, we blanket zone, this is the movement of the market, but we also have an entrenched real estate market where people need to live where they live. That's why we're seeing evictions. That is causing more strain on the need for housing. How does your data take in this entrenched real estate market?
I mean, the short answer is I just used the basic data that I had to paint a picture, and so it's not a simulation of the housing market or a simulation of the city. So it doesn't take into account the entrenched, some of those personal factors or specific housing factors. But we are seeing some change. Like, people are building RCGs and row houses, and people are rezoning. So there is movement, and I'm hoping that this kind of makes it a little bit more fluid. But those are other challenges, building challenges. Those are all things that still need to be addressed, for sure. So I think they're there. The model here is more about painting a picture.
Okay. And currently, in governments and politicians trying to tackle the housing crisis, we're doing a bit of a shotgun approach. And do you see any policies that are counter to each other? I can't remember how long ago we had said, net zero your house. You get loans, you get kind of attached to this built form. And so we're trying to say blanket zone, but will there be a clash of previous policy with this policy if passed?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is a clash of decades of previous policies that were counterproductive, right? Like, I know the focus on sprawl and things. So I think there will always be places where policy intersects. I hope governments can work together to make sure those don't happen. But I think it doesn't behoove us to say, well, this is too hard or things bump into each other too much, so we should just keep things as they are. I think you take the good, you take the bad, you kind of take them both. But I think if you can reasonably feel like we're getting a net positive out of this, then I think it's worth moving forward.
And then last question, hopefully. Have we factored in the current changes that the financial institutions are under, such as OSFI, lending regulations, interest rates, to actually make built form happen in your data?
Yeah, I'm not an economist, and I'm definitely not a banker, so no.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Let's go to Councillor Putmans, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Klumpenhouwer. Back again, I'm afraid, sir. Some water.
Getting some water. Hi.
Thank you for your presentation and lots of incredible insight. I'd ask you for some more insight, if I may. A lot of people speak to the character of their neighborhood, and I'm never quite sure if they're referring to architecture, if they're referring to people, if they're a host of issues, tree canopy. How do you define character in a neighborhood?
I think it's become a very difficult word. It is a very difficult word to define. It's a very, like, you can make character whatever you think it is. For me, it really is about the people that live there, right? Like the people that I see on the street when I walk around my neighborhood. I live in Garrison Woods right now. And the things I can do in that neighborhood. So like the freedom it provides me to do things. So what can I go to Boogie's Burgers and have a burger, or can I go to the ice cream shop, or can I just walk around and enjoy what's going on? And all of those things tend to be supported by more houses because they're usually business related, and people, obviously more people to interact with. So for me, character isn't really about what the house looks like, what the street looks like. It's about who I bump into on the street, and about what I can do in my neighborhood.
Thank you. If you were given a magic wand and wanted to see more affordable housing go onto the market, given the model that we're using right now, what would your first moves be?
To take the land. I mean, there's moves happening right now. Westbrook is a perfect example of a place where that could be very directly affordable housing. So you need to make this effort to have housing that is accessible from the very bottom of incomes, but you also need to change the market. So the problem is cities are wicked problems, right? They're not something that is just solvable with one option, or you can't even really test solutions. You have to really gather as much information as you have and then move forward with it. So you don't want to give me a magic wand. That's probably not a good idea. But the magic wand would be to pull as many levers as possible, maybe 98 levers of them, and execute on this as fast as possible. Look for ways to get this affordable housing through, even if it's not a perfect deal for the city. If it gets people, affordable housing, change as much of the market as you can to loosen it up, so that there's this market effect that happens, so people move into houses and vacate houses that might be more accessible for people with lower incomes. So all of that needs to happen. So my magic wand would be to wave it, I guess, 98 times if I'm making a reference there. But
Thank you for that, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
thank you.